Alright, my script is all written, I'm ready to give my 2 cents on the Runesmith's video. I think a response video is going to be really fun to talk— Damn it, Jacob! Alright, so for those of you who don't know, the Runesmith recently released a video talking about how D&D is too slow. He gives a variety of reasons and some potential ideas for how to fix them. XP to level 3 just released his response video, but he only has like 200 subscribers, so it's fine. I know I'm a Pathfinder channel, but pretty much all of the complaints that Logan brings up in his video apply to Pathfinder just as much as they do to D&D. So let's go point by point and give my opinions on both his complaints and his potential fixes. Also, before we start, none of this is intended as any kind of flame or insult to the Runesmith. He's an amazing guy who makes great content, and I highly recommend you go and watch his original video before watching the rest of this one. There's a link right in the corner of this video. You can also go watch Jacob's response video if you want to, as I'll likely be referencing it as well at least a few times throughout the video. Also, while you're there, you should totally just subscribe to them too, because they make such great content. Okay, let's get to it. So, starting off with Runesmith's summation of his whole video. The main reason that D&D is too slow is because players and GMs alike, quote, overthink it and use too many rules. I think now is as good a time as any to reference the title of my response video. D&D is slow, but that's not a bad thing. Throughout Logan's video, he references the slow pace of the game as being strictly a negative thing. If a game is slowing down, it is 100% bad. I'll talk more about this later, but the main reason I bring this up now is because using too many rules for one player may be just enough rules for another. Different groups enjoy different densities of rule sets. It's why games like Fate Core and Pathfinder can exist side by side. Both games can be used to tell the exact same story, but Fate Core is much simpler to use, while Pathfinder has a 600-page core rulebook. Just look at the two systems' character sheets! This is a super cop-outy answer, and yes, I will be using it a lot. It's a matter of opinion. Tons of people hate the grindy, number-heavy, stacking bonus system of Pathfinder and would rather just get right to the point of what they want to do, and that's totally fine. But we can't forget that there are just as many people out there who love those crunchy numbers. I'm one of them. Some of my favorite parts of TTRPGs are when I get to add an absurd amount of bonuses from different sources all to one roll. But I'm rambling. Let's move forward. Logan talks about the opening of an RPG session and how a DM should always give the group a direction from the get-go. If the DM doesn't provide the next course of action for the group, it drops everyone into a
open ocean without any means of moving in any direction.
Jacob already said exactly what I was thinking in his response video.
This is the primary reason many DMs recap last game, so most players know what happened last time. You're not doing a great job as a dungeon master if you're just starting the game and the players have zero direction.
A recap has always been a staple in my tabletop RPGs. In fact, I often go one step farther and will sometimes pick a random player at the table to recap the previous session. Now, I don't expect them to remember everything, but whenever they get to a point they forgot, another player is always there to fill in the gap, and this creates a great team bonding experience where they just sort of get to retell their story as a group. This gets everyone re-immersed in the world, they got to work together before the session even started, and everyone is fully aware of their surroundings. At this point, I just get to let them run. As a dungeon master, I never want to tell my players what to do or where to go. Sure, I'll give them a light push whenever they seem lost, but overall, this is their story, not mine. So, sorry Logan, but I humbly disagree. My players absolutely have a means of moving. The goals and desires of their characters are the means of moving in whatever direction they want. If the players were last chasing down a zombie who stole a man's cabbages, my cabbages! They follow the zombie's tracks back to a crypt, and that's where we ended the last session. Chances are, after a brief recap, all of the characters will likely want to head down into the crypt to get the poor man's cabbages back. Sure, In a void, they may have no reason to descend into the crypt in front of them. But players are smart. Usually. If they agreed to get the cabbages back in the previous session, they should be just as adamant about getting them back in the following session. Also, once again, Jacob already commented on this, but Logan mentions party disagreements and arguing about plans as a bad thing that slows the game down. Logan, this is roleplay. As in, the RP in TTRPG. That's 40% of the game! Sure, they may not be making any plot progress in that moment, but they're developing characters. Sometimes, character traits get to shine or even develop in situations like this. Everyone at the table gets to understand the relationship between each individual character a little bit better when everyone has a chance to discuss the next course of action. Maybe the dwarf got mad and called the wizard a wee bald-faced shrimp hiding behind his magic. Sure, this may cause some party drama, but similar to games moving slowly, this is not inherently a bad thing. Stories would be so boring if the main cast just got along all the time. Imagine how boring the beginning of The Hobbit would be if Bilbo just up and agreed to go with Gandalf and the dwarves with no fuss. Sure, the plot doesn't get to move right away, but we get to learn how stubborn Bilbo is and how crafty Gandalf is. These are character traits that are important to the story and can come back up and be expanded upon in future encounters. While this may not be as important to a non-roleplay focused table, I think discussion and arguments are a core feature of tabletop RPGs. Alright, enough talking about roleplay. Let's talk about combat. Specifically, initiative. This is a topic where I can somewhat agree with Logan, but not completely. Especially in big encounters, initiative can be a pain. I've stupidly run encounters in the past with like 15 enemies, and I had all my players go to the bathroom, get a drink, get a snack and whatever, as I individually rolled and kept track and wrote down all of the initiative scores and then rewrote them in descending order to put them in order, and it did take about 5 minutes. Sure, you can group enemies by one single initiative roll and move them all at once, but that can very easily sway the battle to one side. If all of the enemies go first, a player's probably gonna die. If all of the players go first, most of the enemies will probably die. I highly agree with Jacob's statement that an RPG encounter should not have more than 15 separate actors. If you have 5 players, don't use any more than 10 enemies.
D&D combat feels like XCOM if you give everyone one character and then the Dungeon Master controls 8 other characters but doesn't use any strategy.
Less is more when it comes to total numbers of enemies. Now we come to my biggest gripes. I'm sorry, Logan. I love you, but boy, are we gonna have some beef. Okay, this is completely my opinion, and is in no way the right answer. But I do not think players should ever know armor class. It's actually a pet peeve of mine when I attack an enemy, roll a 17, and my DM says, sorry, his AC is 18. It completely takes me out of the moment of my attack and just turns the game into numbers. I know this is super hypocritical because I'm the guy who said, I love the numbers, but hear me out. I love numbers as much as the next guy, but when I'm actually attempting something, that's when the numbers stop and the story starts. I don't want to hear, you missed his AC by 1. I want to hear, you slash at the goblin, but he just barely sidesteps your blade, grazing the edge of his pauldrons. This gives me, the player, enough information that I can infer that I was close to his AC, but I still get to hear how it plays out and I'm still fully immersed in the combat. I know this isn't a big deal to everyone, but I can't stand when my DM gives out DCs and creature statistics during the encounter. Afterwards, sure, that's fine. I love talking about numbers after an encounter, just not in the middle of the fight. For me, it's like you're watching an action scene in the movie, and in the middle of the action scene, they pause and show you behind the scenes, like, oh yeah, here's where we use the green screen. See that bus that Nicolas Cage just flipped off of? That's not really there. Okay, back to the movie. Using average damage rolls is fine. That could speed things up a bit, but I like click-clack math rocks. Plus, I'm pretty quick at simple math. Seriously, I've only ever lost that math game in Trivia Murder Party once, and it was to a secretary who does simple math as their job. But yeah, I don't have too much animosity towards this one. I just love the random chance that a die roll adds. Once a goblin hits you for 3 damage, you know exactly how much of a threat he is when using average damage. With a random die roll, he could hit for 2 damage at first, leading you to underestimate him, and then he could come out of nowhere with a max damage roll of 8 damage. Never underestimate a goblin.
Let players combine their turns, and instead have people coordinate their stuff for Avengers-style combo moves.
Really cool concept, Logan, but this would absolutely make the game take longer. I'm not opposed to it. If my players have an amazing Avengers-style rule of cool idea, I am all for it. But Jacob brought up this great point that the ready and help actions already exist in both D&D and Pathfinder. You can already do this. In fact, in Pathfinder, some classes specialize in doing this. The Warrior Muse Bard and the Martial Archetype in Pathfinder 2e have tons of feats that do exactly this, letting your allies take actions even on your own turn. It's awesome. He talks about removing the help action and just letting the players combine their actions to make entirely unique abilities, but remember that this isn't in the rules. While you all try to figure out how this combo move will work, what exactly needs to be rolled, and how it will interact with initiative and the turn order, it's going to slow the game down a hefty amount, sort of defeating your original purpose.
There's a point where the excitement of randomness gets replaced with the monotony of actually rolling.
I have to heavily disagree with this line here. In 6 years of playing tabletop role-playing games, I have never once gotten sick of rolling a dice. Hell, I'm usually rolling dice for fun when it's not my turn. Nothing can match the heart-pounding adrenaline of shaking that polyhedron in your hand and letting it loose, even for something totally meaningless and inconsequential, because it can lead to hysterical moments of supreme success or miserable failure. Just recently, in a game of 3.5 D&D I was playing, my wizard was making tea.
Give me an appraise check.
Oh yeah, there you go.
To see if you do it right. I don't.
What about concentration?
That works too.
All right.
Natural 1.
You will take
Right.
5 damage. You can drink that tea, and it goes down real hot.
To some people, this may seem like ridiculous overkill, but rolls like this lead to some of the most fun moments I've ever had in RPGs. I personally don't think you could ever roll too many dice, but that's just my opinion. Alright, I promise this is the last point I'm going to nitpick because this is getting way longer than I intended it to be. Logan's pit conundrum. He paints a picture of a group trying to figure out how to get over a pit in a dungeon, and that the discussion is taking too long. His first solution is to break out the hourglass. I don't hate this solution as it forces the players to think quickly before something bad happens in-game. But once again, if your players enjoy talking about every possible solution and the outcomes, let them. I think this kind of forced solution is only required if part of the table is arguing about options and everyone else is bored and waiting for them to finish. His other point about the pit conundrum is something I cannot agree with on a fundamental level.
And whenever someone actually tries to cross the pit, just let them do it.
This is my single biggest problem with Logan's video. The moment you just let somebody succeed, no matter what, invalidates every dice rolled in that game. Once you allow a character to achieve something just for the sake of story progression, it instantly makes the game about you and your story instead of being about the characters and their adventure. This is because you care more about advancing the plot than letting the characters fail, falter, and figure a way out of things. It'll suck if it happens, but if the rogue just decides to jump the pit, I'm making him roll for it. And if he nat ones, well, he's plummeting 30 feet down into spikes. Unexpected twists like that can instantly up the stakes in natural and completely unexpected ways. In that moment, the game is no longer about diving deeper into the dungeon. It's suddenly about finding out how to get the rogue up and out of that hole before he bleeds to death. Some people may see this as a worthless distraction that just wastes everyone's time, but I completely disagree. This like arguing we talked about earlier, is amazing time for character development and unique skills to show their worth. The cleric can tend to the rogue's wounds from a distance, while the barbarian assembles a climbing kit to descend into the pit. Meanwhile, the ranger is keeping an eye out for an ambush, while the wizard casts bull strength on the barbarian so he can carry the rogue on his back and climb back up and out of the pit. In that simple scenario, the entire party just contributed to saving their ally. Everyone got to roleplay, and the danger of the dungeon around them just became far more real, immersive, and deadly. So, to sum up my main point, yes, D&D can be very slow, but that isn't inherently a bad thing. As long as everyone at the table is having fun, then the game is going exactly as fast as it should be. Different groups enjoy different paces of games, and if you can't stand games that get held up and drag at times, then I recommend talking to your table. Identify your biggest issues as a group and work together to fix them. Is the DM just going on and on and on with their descriptions? Let them know that the group would rather move a bit faster and tone them down. Is combat just way too much of a slog that nobody cares about? Then try some of Logan's rules here. Average damage and passive initiative could easily save you about 5 to 10 minutes per combat. There's always a fix for whatever your group needs. Always remember that the rulebook is simply guidelines and does not need to be followed to a T. Logan puts it best in his video when he says,
F the rules.
Just make sure everyone at the table knows exactly how much you're going to f the rules, because we still love a ton of those rules, clunky as they may be.